Welcome here. So welcome everyone to our program on the role of philanthropy in supporting democratic values and justice with author and political scientist, Professor Rob Reich. We'll be here from 6 to around 7:15. And before we get started, I just wanted to mention that this is one of the many pieces of co-curricular programming that the Western Center for Social Impact and Innovation sponsors at Miami and throughout the year. We were interested in this conversation with Professor Reich primarily because we want to explore fundamental questions about how to create a society and a world that is more socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable for all of us. So although I am certainly not the expert here, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the size and impact of contemporary US philanthropy, I just wanted to provide a few numbers for some context to allow you to get a grasp of the scope of this issue and why we're interested in it. According to the National Philanthropic Trust, Americans donated $471.44 billion in 2020. Just over 20% of that total is specifically from foundations, which Professor Reich will discuss more in a moment. Charitable giving comprised 2.3% of gross domestic product last year. And we want to address tonight with some of the challenges and solutions posed specifically by private philanthropy in a democratic society. Before we get to that, however, I would like to introduce Tracy Mack Parker, who is working with the Western Center as our visiting scholar this fall. Tracy is the founder of Citizen Philanthropy and an attorney by training who has spent the last 15 plus years in nonprofit and philanthropy ecosystems, including in senior advising roles at Pew Charitable Trusts and the Philanthropy Workshop. She's co-teaching in individualized studies this year at Western, our service learning class. And perhaps most importantly, Tracy is a Miami alum. So with that, Tracy, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. And it's good to see you. I know so many of you, we've been together in our Western 341 class on citizen philanthropy, and you're midway through, which is fantastic. And I thought as we begin to move into this conversation with Rob, let's first get grounded. So most of us on this webinar are in class together. I know we have some other students from other disciplines who are visiting us. So for you who have not been in our class, we tried to share the space at the beginning of class to get grounded, because you are doing so much. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's a lot of work that you have to be managing. And we want to make space for us to be present and really enjoy our time in community together as a community of learners. So I'm going to volunteer this time, and I'll take us through a Tonglen meditation. And I thought of this because most of you are now out in community. You're working together on your projects. You're meeting your community partners. Some of you are physically present in community at the farm. Others are working virtually, I know. But when you move into community with each other, sometimes you get very close to each other's struggles and what you might be grappling with. And the Tonglen practice is a way to just kind of be present in someone else's struggle and just be with them, versus sort of shy away from it because it's uncomfortable. So the practice is simple in description. I'm really new at it, so I can't say it's necessarily easy to practice, but the description is all you do is on your inhale, that you take an inhale in and you're trying to take in whatever pain the person you're with is experiencing. And that pain could be their health, it could be anxiety, it could be loneliness, right? So you just breathe in what they're exuding to you. You hold it and then you breathe out the antidote. So if someone is ill, you breathe in the sickness and you breathe out healing. someone's feeling anxious, you might breathe in that anxiety, hold it, and then breathe out calmness. If they're lonely, you can breathe in the loneliness, and then you can exhale, breathe out solidarity, whatever you're doing. But it's a way actually just to get comfortable with where people are in this work of social transformation, which can be at times challenging, at times I hope it's joyful for you too. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to close your eyes for a minute. So close your eyes. And I want you to visualize someone that you care about, who you know is going through some type of struggle. Have them in your head. They're going through some type of struggle. And for a minute, you're going to breathe in whatever pain or struggle, and then you're going to exhale some type of comfort to them. For 1 minute, I'll track time. Go ahead. With your eyes still closed, I want you now to, when you exhale, exhale it out for the world. So now you're expanding who you're caring about. So inhale that pain and exhale it out to the broader world for another 30 seconds. Last inhale and send comfort out. Good. You can now open your eyes. And if you would, if you can, if you're a place where you can turn on your screens, your videos, please do. Really makes it helpful for us to engage. Thank you. Thank you. I see many of you now. So as Jackie said, we have the good fortune of having Rob Reich with us tonight. Today for him, he's over there in on the West Coast, so it's still the afternoon. And our objectives for tonight or today, this session, is really to critique the role of philanthropy, like Jackie said, to critique the role of philanthropy in a democratic society and discuss what role philanthropy should play today. And also, as change makers, I know some of you, many of you might not view yourselves as philanthropists, let alone like big billionaire type philanthropists, which is part of our conversation tonight, but you're change makers and you're moving in spaces and you do have power and influence and privilege. So I hope you also will consider tangible ways to democratize the way you move through philanthropy and your change making. So, and I will, I mean, I remember when I was leading the philanthropy workshop, it's an organization made up of 450 individual philanthropists from all over the world. And we'd meet every year for a retreat. And there'd be about 100 philanthropists who'd gather for a weekend. And someone on our team said, oh, we should invite some outspoken critic of philanthropy. And I just bristled at the whole idea. I was like, no, no, no. Our job is to motivate and inspire people to give and to give well and to give strategically. And I didn't want what felt to me like someone talking about negative things. And honestly, I'll tell you deep down, I wasn't very comfortable with the idea that the philanthropist in the room that I really cared about might be offended. And I knew they were sincerely committed to making a difference, but I was really uncomfortable having a critical conversation around this work of philanthropy that is often lauded and applauded, and not very much criticized, at least within the circles of philanthropy and a bit beyond. And then over time, thankfully, and I'm still working on this, I've come to understand the importance of critique. And it's really a practice of open-mindedness, right? It's like letting yourself really learn to question and to listen, to let go of preconceived ideas, and have this willingness to make the space for a personal shift in a belief I might have or you might have on this path towards social transformation. So I am really excited and appreciative to have Rob with us here today. As Jackie said, he is a professor of political science at Stanford, and he co-directs the Stanford's Philanthropy and Civil Society Center, and they publish SSIR, the Stanford Social Innovation Review. I highly recommend that you go there. It's a great resource to look at trends in philanthropy and impact investing. And there's a lot of healthy critique going on there, as well as sharing best practices and knowledge. And I'm also happy to say that not during my tenure at the philanthropy workshop, but later, Rob actually was invited to speak at the retreat, and he was like a crowd favorite. So, so before I turn it over to Rob for the next, the next 45 minutes or so, where he will facilitate a conversation around philanthropy, I want him to understand where you are with this idea of philanthropy. So take a minute, have something to write with. Have something to write with. If not, you're gonna have to keep it in your head. But I want you to take like a minute and answer this question. Too often, philanthropy is this, and you fill in the blank. Too often, philanthropy is, it could be something like focus more on what the philanthropist wants rather than what society needs, right? Whatever your kind of critique or your feeling, your questioning around philanthropy, that's what I want you to write a minute on. Too often philanthropy is, and just go. No good, no bad, just write. I'll track time. So finishing up your thoughts. Too often philanthropy is, might just be a sentence or two. Okay, now write a couple more sentences, and here's what I want you to respond to. At its best, philanthropy is, you fill in the blanks. It could be something like philanthropy is responsive to the agendas set by communities, right? At its best. At its best, philanthropy is, just go for a minute. Start finishing up your thoughts, however you define philanthropy. At its best, philanthropy is. Okay, all right. So again, if your video isn't on and you are able to turn it on, please do. And let's have a few of you come off mute and get us going. You can respond to either question. Too often philanthropy is, right? So sort of your critique, or at its best, philanthropy is, or both. Who wants to go first? Come off mute. There's a lot of you, so just come off or raise your hand. And I'm admitting some people. Jackie, are you seeing people come in? Liv, are you raising your hand? Or
Yeah. So to me, a lot of times philanthropy is too often like a disconnect between the classes and comes from a place of like upper class self-gratification than actually understanding a lot of marginalized groups' root issues.
Thank you. Yep, we're getting some snaps. Thank you. And Zoe, I will read. I see you can't come off mute. And your comment is, philanthropy is a Band-Aid at its best. Yeah, and keep going. Rob's like encouraging you to keep going in chat too, for those who it's easier in chat. And who else will share? Let's have 2 more people. Bug, is that you talking, but you're on mute?
Yeah, I was asking Liv if mine was good enough.
No problem.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I wrote that I think philanthropy is too often focused on what someone thinks needs help rather than what actually needs to be done.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm scrolling around. Anyone else want to come off mute and share as others are putting in the chat?
Sorry, I'm driving, but I can talk.
Thank you, Cam.
Yeah. I would say too often philanthropy is underappreciated.
What do you mean by that?
Like just the impacts that it has.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Andrew, you want to come off mute and share what you said?
Yeah, not a problem. I think that we use philanthropy as an excuse for rich people to exist. We talk about all the good things that they're doing and allow them to hoard wealth while poor people are dying every day. Philanthropy, to me, is bullcrap, and I don't like it at all, period.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. You're getting some snaps there too. Thank you.
I will say that on the good side, I think that at its best, it's able to solve some complex real world issues that governments aren't able to, simply due to the ineffectualness of bureaucracy, which I'm not a fan of.
I really think personally that poor people having access to money can solve their own problems way better than philanthropy can. Poor people know what they need better than anyone else, including governments. But that's why I kind of like the democracy thing and let people decide.
Great. Yeah, both of you. Thanks, Will and Andrew, for adding on. I think it's very relevant to the conversation. Indeed, I think I will now transition over to you, Rob, to lead us through this conversation, and we're going to make room for Q&A towards the end, but throughout, please feel free, use chat. You can ask questions there. Jackie and I are watching the chat. Rob will call out if we're seeing something like to ask you to answer in the moment. But Rob, could you start too with just what led you to this work? What is your story, and then take it away.
Sure. Well, thank you, Tracy, and everyone for giving me the chance to join your class and your discussion. I'm a political philosopher by training. I teach in the political science and philosophy department at Stanford, and I came into this question about philanthropy through a kind of unexpected, almost an accidental route. I don't have any experience working in a foundation. I don't have any, meaningful family connections to anybody who's a philanthropist. But a couple things happened to me while I was teaching in my early years at Stanford that then opened this question up that I think many of you can resonate with too. The first is that I live in the Bay Area, as you all can guess, with Silicon Valley, a kind of place of extraordinary wealth and riches in some towns, and then grinding poverty close by in others. And I had my first child. I enrolled my kid in kindergarten in the local public schools in Palo Alto, what was said to be a fantastic public school district. And on the second day of school, first day of school, my kid came home 5 years old with a whole bunch of, papers from the school district. Thank you for enrolling your child in our fantastic public schools. We're so happy to have you and welcome you, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was a page of information that said, we in the Palo Alto School District believe that the school funding system in California does not provide adequate financing for the quality of education that we think is so important to provide your child. So therefore, your expected but voluntary contribution this year is $2,000 per child enrolled in the Palo Alto schools. And first of all, I couldn't believe that I was being asked for $2,000 to give to the public school system. And second of all, I thought, well, Palo Alto is pretty rich. They probably can get a lot of money from some people. And I started doing a little research project about private money going to public schools. And it revealed exactly what you would predict. Wealthy towns can raise a lot more money for supporting their public school systems than less wealthy towns can. And then it widens inequality and opportunity. Or to put it somewhat differently, as I was then, this is the second part of the motivation, you guys, is it true that all of you are enrolled at Miami University of Ohio? Is that right? All of you here? So I just looked it up before I joined the call here. Stanford has a $30 billion endowment. It raises $1 billion in new money every single year from generous philanthropists and donors, including the undergraduates themselves, maybe like yourselves. Before you graduate, you'll be asked to make a $25 or $50 donation to the Miami University Alumni Fund, or maybe some of you are paid by the Alumni Association to work, or the Development Association to work for Miami University in fundraising. But Miami University is a wealthy school compared to the vast majority of colleges and universities in the United States, and certainly compared to a community college. It has a $500 million endowment, but you guys are poor. You are the East Palo Alto compared to the Palo Alto public school system. And Stanford raises a ton of money every single year that's larger than the entire size of your endowment. All of this is a lesson for me about how, in many circumstances, philanthropy serves not to do what I thought it meant, which was addressing poverty or addressing disadvantage or trying to assist marginalized populations. In the United States, philanthropy is quite frequently an exercise in which rich people help out other rich people, or money stays within its social class and it doesn't flow downstream, or it does only rarely. All right, so all of that would have been, as it were, for me, shocking enough or distressing enough. And then I discovered something else about philanthropy and charity that I really didn't know, which is that the policies in the United States that help organize the practice of giving money away, a set of tax policies and rules that govern the creation of what I'm guessing you've talked about in the class, 501c3 organizations that are called public charities under the law, or a foundation that's a classified organization under the law. There are tax deductions and tax advantages to giving money away. And so I realized then that the Palo Alto schools and the parents in Palo Alto weren't just worsening inequalities in school opportunity by giving money to the public school system. They were actually getting a tax break from the US government to do that. And the federal government was exacerbating an inequality that I thought some level of government was responsible for redressing. Or to put it differently, I haven't done the exact math, but if Miami University of Ohio's endowment is about $500 million, I would predict that the amount of tax breaks given to donors to Stanford every single year are probably in the neighborhood of the size of your entire endowment, which is to say, American citizens are losing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every single year to assist the giving projects of rich people, rather than taking the money and distributing it in the ordinary way that democracies do through our elected representatives. All right, all of that made me think, how did we get something in the United States called a 501c3? What exactly is that anyway? Or when did we get tax breaks for giving money away? How'd that happen? And as I began to think more about this, it became more of a scholarly project than just a kind of set of irritations that I experienced in being asked to give money to my own son's kindergarten. I thought, well, I guess there's a literature in political science or philosophy that explains how to think about the relationship between philanthropy and democracy, or when did public charities come into existence? How did foundations start? I'd heard of the Rockefeller Foundation. I'd heard of the Ford Foundation. Of course, I knew all of the tech billionaires in my backyard, but I didn't know anything about the laws that helped to create the idea of a foundation. So as I started to research that, I realized there wasn't a whole lot written about it. And I thought, instead of writing about giving money to public schools or giving money to Stanford, I could write about the much bigger question, which then led to almost a decade's worth of research in a book that I wrote in 2018 called Just Giving: Why Philanthropy is Failing Democracy and How It Can Do Better. Let me just give one last example of what I take to be the outrageousness of policy structures that help to give some content to philanthropy in the United States. In, I don't know, 2016 or something, as I was, finishing up my research, Stanford and other places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the wealthiest universities in the country, sometimes they get single donations of 100 or 200 or 300 million dollars, which is, say, a single individual is giving a one-time gift to these universities almost as large as the entire endowment at Miami University of Ohio. So in 2016, 2017, the founder of Nike, the shoe company, a guy named Phil Knight, who had gone to Stanford University, gave, I think it was $300 or $400 million to Stanford to create what he called a kind of new version of a Rhodes Scholarship. There was an idea to create the Knight Scholarships at Stanford, a set of graduate fellowships for the best and brightest around the world to come to Stanford to study for a couple of years. And there was an article that was written in an online magazine called Vox.com. Some of you may know it. And the headline said something like, "For the love of God, people, stop giving money to Stanford University." And then it went on to explain in this article that the world would actually be better off. Life on planet Earth would be improved if, instead of giving $300 million to Stanford, Phil Knight had taken that $300 million, put it in his backyard, and set it on fire. And I started thinking to myself, well, how would that have made the world a better place? And the answer to that question is that Phil Knight got some amount of tax benefit for giving the money to Stanford. Let's assume, I don't know, it was $30 or $40 million. So when he gave $300 million to Stanford, the US government reduced his tax bill by $30 or $40 million. So if he had set on fire $300 million in his backyard, he would have owed $30 or $40 million on his consumption, which is to say his burning of the $300 million. The US Treasury would have had $30 or $40 million more than it would have had if instead he gave it to Stanford. And so the question this writer for Vox asked is, what do you think is going to be more important for the world to make it a better place? $300 million to Stanford to create a set of Rhodes-like scholarships for people who are already probably on a rocket ship trajectory of, attainment and blah, 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 or $30 or $40 million to the Treasury distributed in the ordinary, broken, ineffective way that the Congress distributes money. The writer of this article said, I'll put my money on the 30 or $40 million into the US Treasury, which is why he concluded it would be better for the world to have burned the money in his backyard. All right, I've given you a kind of, I don't know what I'll call it extreme, but I put it in an extreme fashion to show you, as Tracy said, the kind of critical edge that I bring to the thinking about philanthropy. And now I'll just summarize the end of my research by saying, here's what I came to when it comes to thinking about rich people or big philanthropy. Then I have a set of different things to say about ordinary giving, the sort that I do or you do, relatively small amounts of money to nonprofit organizations. So big philanthropy is by definition an activity of wealthy people. It's the direction of your private assets, your own money, to some public-facing influence. And we often say, of course, that's the reason it's praiseworthy, because do we really want to say that if, my friend decided to buy a 5th car, a 3rd house, or, for a billionaire, a Hawaiian island, and instead the person decides to give some money away, that surely is better than just buying more stuff or consuming more stuff. And that seems right, which is why when you direct your private assets to some public-facing influence, it seems like it might be praiseworthy, independent of what effect you have. But that's the thing I want to reject. So when a rich person gives a whole bunch of money away, what they're trying to do is exercise some influence over things that are collectively of importance to us. They're trying to have a public influence. So my first thought is that anywhere in a democratic society that a rich person or anyone is exercising power over the rest of us or exercising power over us, what it deserves is our scrutiny, not our gratitude. We don't thank people in general for having power over us. We ask whether the power they exercise over us is in any way justifiable. Bill Gates, just to give a final example of this, has a huge philanthropic program to improve public education in the United States. Public education in the United States needs to be improved. There's lots of space to make it better. And he gives millions, even billions of dollars away to try to improve public education. As one person has said of Bill Gates is the nation's unelected school superintendent. I read a story at one point about Bill Gates that he was exercising on a treadmill and watching a documentary about some new history curriculum in New Zealand or in Australia. And he was taken by it and thought how interesting this was and decided to try to bring it to the United States and begin to experiment with this interesting school curriculum. So he funded a bunch of, trials of it in public schools. Well, as it happens, sometimes when I'm exercising, I have a few ideas about how to improve public education. I can't just decide to then roll out a program to pilot my own exercise ideas about how to improve public education. And I don't impose them, or as it were, offer them up in the form of money to school districts. That's the sense in which Bill Gates has this power. So big philanthropy is an exercise of power by the wealthy that's mostly unaccountable. The Ford Foundation can't put the Rockefeller Foundation out of business. There's no such thing as competition between foundations in which one of them can lose their permission to do their work. It's pretty low on transparency. If you want to learn what foundations do, there's a modest set of legal disclosures that are required. I assume you've already talked in this class about the super interesting work of Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos. She's given away $9 or $10 billion in 10 months, or excuse me, in 18 months worth of time in a completely interesting way. No strings attached, general operating support, thumb on the scale of nonprofit leaders with lived experience and the problems they're trying to solve. But Mackenzie Scott, $9 or $10 billion worth of power, and she has given the world 3 blog posts in order to understand what she's doing. If you want to figure out what Mackenzie Scott's strategy is, what we have to go on are 3 posts she put on a website called Medium. She has a kind of hidden background set of advisors. They work for Bridgespan, a consultancy. Good luck trying to get anyone's attention because they're not going to talk to you. In fact, they don't even want to share anything about what they do. Big Philanthropy is not accountable. It's not transparent. It's also set up to exist in perpetuity. The Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation will live forever, or that's the point legally, to try to live forever, which is to say that the dead hand of the donor reaches out of the grave to strangle the preferences of all living and future generations. Who thought it was a good idea to give dead people power over the living? But that's what a foundation that lives forever does. And then finally, as I mentioned at the start, Big Philanthropy is lavishly and generously tax advantaged. It's the tax subsidized liberty to give money away in a way that if you were really just giving your own money away, you wouldn't ask for a tax break in order to do so. There, that gives you the end of the critique. In the book that I've written and other writing I've done, I've given a reconstruction and defense of the role of philanthropy, which I'm happy to also offer up to you if you wish. But why don't I pause there? Maybe I've succeeded in making Tracy uncomfortable, or maybe hopefully you haven't regretted the idea of inviting me here to join the class. But you asked for a critique, and there it is for you. I see a few people in the chat adding a couple things, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or put your hand up, or I'll take a few ideas from the side if you want. Or Tracy, if you want to moderate, by all means, go ahead.
So this class has been reflecting for 6, 7, 8 weeks now, and I get to read your reflections. You have a lot to say. You have a lot of questions. I think I'm thrilled, Rob, that you can like keep pace with, I know, some of the questions that folks have. So please ask Sasha. Sasha, I've seen you communicating in chat. Why don't you come off mute if you're comfortable and pose a question or a comment.
Hello.
Hi, Sasha.
Hi. I left a comment. Where is it? Oh yeah, I said, what is the purpose of tax breaks other than to save rich people money? And furthermore, why does it seem like so many rich people are so resistant to paying their taxes?
Yep. All right. Well, those are two separate and important questions. What's the purpose of tax breaks? Well, the purpose of tax breaks from a standpoint of Congress or a theory of democracy is to give incentives to certain kinds of behavior, and then in the form of taxation, disincentives for certain kinds of behavior. So there are taxes on gasoline imposed by the federal government. There are taxes on cigarettes imposed by the federal government, with the ordinary economic thought that if you make certain things more expensive, the supply and demand curve changes, and you decrease the consumption of those things. And then furthermore, you can take the tax revenue you generate from the sale of those things and use them for various forms of social programming, including anti-smoking campaigns or climate change policies or something like that. So we have tax breaks for a similar reason. Socially beneficial activity, Congress can provide tax incentives to do. And so you might think that the theory would be that you put in place tax incentives for charitable giving because the assumption is that charitable giving is a socially beneficial activity. In the United States, the mechanism we use for a tax incentive, which is a tax deduction, you diminish the amount of your taxable income by the amount of your donation, has a lot of problems with it. So let me get, for just a quick moment, wonky here with you all. I'm going to guess that very few of you have filed your own income taxes yet, but you will soon enough, and you'll come to understand how this works. So let's say that Tracy, Jackie, and I are all making small charitable contributions. Let's say we all make $100 contribution, and we decide we have the same idea about what to support. We make the $100 contribution to the same organization in the same city. So from the standpoint of the public, the identical public good or social benefit has been created because we've each given $100 to the same organization. Now, let's say that I'm in the highest income tax bracket. I'm a rich person, so I'm taxed at a 40% rate. Let's say Tracy's a middle-class person and she's taxed at a 20% rate. Let's say Jackie's a low-income person and she's taxed at a 10% rate. So what a tax deduction means for giving money away is that when I, the rich person, give $100 away, I write off $100 of my taxable income, and it costs me $60 to give that $100 away because $40 is written off of my taxes. I'm in the 40% tax bracket. Tracy gives away $100. She's in the 20% tax bracket. Her $100 donation costs her $80, and the government forgives her $20 from her taxes. Jackie, the least well-off person amongst us, gives the $100 away, and it costs her $90 to give the $100 away because she's in the 10% tax bracket, and the government forgives her 10% of her giving. So the tax deduction gives a bigger benefit to the wealthiest among us. It doesn't have to be that way. You can create a tax incentive that isn't a deduction, but that gives different benefits to different people or equal benefits to all people independent of where they are in the income tax bracket. That's just an example of the problems in the policy structures of American philanthropy. All right, why are rich people so resistant to paying taxes? Well, there, a long story involved with that. There are a variety of ways in which people try to protect their wealth because they act in their self-interest. And then there's a whole variety of kind of 50 years of suspicion that's been generated of government, and you don't even need to think that it's an ideology that's at work. You look at Washington, D.C., and you worry about the effectiveness or the dysfunction we see in government. And some people conclude from that they can do better than the government can with charitable contributions than government could by expending public dollars. And then it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The less we fund government, the less competent that government is, the less effective government can be. And then charity or philanthropy will come to be seen as a better alternative. And the cycle builds upon itself. Thanks for the question, Sasha.
Are there questions on this topic? Rob's going to keep going, but what questions come to mind that you want to ask?
I have a question while we're on this super sexy topic of taxes. So some of you may know, some of you may not, that the 20 wealthiest nations met this past year, as they always do, and they decided for the first time, at a time that I can remember, that they were going to do something about, everybody in the world taxing corporations and wealthy individuals at kind of a similar rate so that you don't get into this issue of tax havens, putting your money in different places where it's taxed at a lower rate. Rob, I didn't know if you thought that that may have any impact on this conversation, even though I know that there aren't actual plans kind of put forward for implementation yet.
Yep. Yeah, this is a conversation that is partly about philanthropy, but fundamentally is about corporate taxation. So it's Jackie. Am I getting your name right, or should you prefer Jacqueline? Okay.
You're correct.
Okay. Jackie's talking about this recent agreement by a whole bunch of different countries to ensure that there's a minimal rate of taxation for companies. So I live out here in Silicon Valley, one of the most popular kinds of tech companies around, companies like Amazon, although of course that's based in Seattle, companies that are bringing various forms of robotics or automation to the workplace. and displacing human workers and replacing human workers with machines. That makes the company a lot of money. And if they can register their company in some overseas location, they can shift their profits in a variety of ways that are entirely legal. And many of these extremely wealthy tech companies don't pay any corporate tax at all. And then they'll say, the people whose jobs they've displaced, well, the problem of people who are out of work, that's the government's problem, not our problem. Or there'll be a corporate social responsibility approach to thinking about those problems. And part of what this whole arrangement with the tax agreement you just described, Jackie, is so that it will be less possible for extremely high revenue, high profit companies to game the system by locating their profits in other parts of the world and diminishing or eliminating their corporate tax payments. Now there'll be some agreement that you can't compete by going to the Cayman Islands or whatever the place is and call your headquarters there, the place where all your profits are registered, and the Cayman Islands has decided to give people zero taxes or corporate taxes. This is just the beginning of the way to try to approach the problem of corporate tax. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, famously went before Congress a couple years ago and said, Apple pays every penny of tax that it owes. And of course, as a description, that's correct. They're not breaking the law by underpaying their taxes, but they pay, as the wealthiest company in the world, shockingly little tax, despite the fact that they have record revenues and record profits. Now, it's a political question what the right corporate tax rate should be. I don't have an answer to that. But the idea of paying as low or no tax as possible and then pushing onto governments the responsibility for solving problems that are sometimes caused by companies, as in this machines replacing humans example is meant to indicate, is a sign of a broken system, in my view.
Thank you.
I mean, Tracy, before we shift to something else, let me just ask, any of the group here, I don't know what year you are, first year, second year, junior, senior, graduate student, but if Miami University, Ohio is even, partly in the game, as almost every university is, of trying to raise money from its alumni, you will soon be asked, if you haven't already been asked, to make an annual contribution of, only $5. We'll take $5 from you. And the reason that'll be offered to you is that, maximum participation, 100% participation in our alumni giving campaign really matters. And even though I started off by saying that Miami University of Ohio has a much smaller endowment than Stanford, it does have $500 million in the endowment. So why would you give $5 to a university that already has $500 million in the endowment and call it charity?
Anyone? Any takers? Is someone going to write a check? Why not?
Hello.
Lindsay, go ahead.
Okay, hi. I think that if someone wasn't informed on this stuff and they just wanted to be nice, and like if I graduated and I didn't take this class or whatever, and I just like really loved Miami and they were like, just $5, and I'm like, I have $5. I could give them $5, like out of the goodness of my heart. I would maybe if I wasn't educated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. I think that one of the reasons why these alumni campaigns are so important from the standpoint of the university is that they've studied social science, and the social science evidence about a really simple and important question. What is the biggest predictor of whether someone will make a charitable contribution? And the answer to that question is the following. People are more likely to make a charitable contribution if someone they know personally asks them to make a charitable contribution. So if your fellow alumni, especially even if it's a friend of yours, asks you to make a charitable contribution, you feel like it's kind of fulfilling a social tie or an obligation. Or think, for example, you've probably been asked before, your aunt or your uncle or your distant cousin is running in the half marathon to raise money for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, or some version of that, the breast cancer 5K. You don't say to your friend, well, let me check the statistics of how effective this organization is before I hand off my $25 to you. Your friend would say, you're being a jerk. You know, I asked you to support me. That's the social tie that's at work. Get people to ask other people to give a donation, and they do. Why do museums and universities have auctions and galas as a way of celebrating their donors? Because you get friends who know each other in the room and you get them to ask each other to give money, and it turns out they do. Final observation, most people's friend network are in the similar income or social class as they are in. Relatively few people have cross-class friend networks. Rich people know rich people, middle-class people know middle-class people, and so on. So you get rich people asking other rich people to give money away for the kinds of causes that rich people prefer to give to, museums and universities. You get middle-class people asking middle-class people to give money away, et cetera, et cetera. And then you begin to understand the structure of why there's so much inequality or problem with philanthropy.
And I'm looking here maybe as a way to think about, well, then what is the purpose of philanthropy? Does it actually serve any purpose? And I'm looking at Sasha, what you wrote about, and I'll let you share, Sasha, if you want, around the tradition of giving that you are familiar with. Share your comment.
I kind of commented on like kind of how this reminded me of like how the traditional act of giving of potlatches were like discouraged and even like made illegal by the US when the US was really trying to control indigenous tribes. And a lot of like the reason for why they try to get rid of the potlatch and giveaways and such, in which, you know, the more affluent, more powerful people of a tribe would give something away to others, to visitors, and like, you know, even to the most powerless people of their tribe, they would give them something. And it is it's like kind of a show. It's kind of hard to explain. It's like giving things to others, like gives to yourself.
Right.
Way. Like it's supposed to be like spiritual, but when the US was trying to take control and to really assimilate and end indigenous cultures, break up tribes, they really tried to be like, hey, you shouldn't give away your stuff because your private property should stay with you. And in the end, that just like loses the tribal unit their power because they're not as connected. It's harder to be as one, and it's easier to be screwed over by the US. Yep.
I'll make just a very quick comment on that, Sasha. So I'd separate out two different points. One is a point about a kind of colonial or imperialistic orientation that the US and many other countries have had towards their own indigenous populations, dispossessing them of land, doing some of the various things you just described. And the second is a kind of system of giving that isn't present only within indigenous peoples, but in fact in many different places amongst many peoples, that it isn't talked about in my mind as frequently enough. And I'm going to call it something you didn't call it, but I think it's what you have in mind. It's a system of mutual aid. Everyone a giver and everyone a receiver. You need something today that I provide, but then down the line, I might need something that you can provide me. I think we all probably experienced a very modest version of this in those first weeks after the lockdowns and the pandemic. I don't know what your local neighborhoods were like, but I read all kinds of stories about how now that we're stuck at home, there's the elderly couple down the street, and you would go down and say, can I bring back some groceries for you? Or the elderly couple had a whole bunch of extra masks and they could provide those to other people in the neighborhood. A kind of mutual aid network in which giving and taking, giving and receiving is common. There is something we can appropriately call charity, but it's not from rich person to poor person. It's not from donor to recipient. It's from person to person, each person sometimes a giver, each person sometimes a receiver. And that begins to eliminate the system of dependency that the recipients often have towards the donors or givers. One of the, again, kind of stereotypes of seeing and experiencing what it's like to work within the world of big philanthropy. I have talked to a bunch of people, Tracy, I'm sure will have many more stories than I would have, in which you worked for a nonprofit organization for a long time and you were always trying to raise another donation from various people or a foundation. And then you get hired by a foundation and you sort of cross to the other side and you become a program officer at a foundation. And in that world, sometimes people say overnight, you turn into a much better looking, a much funnier, and a much smarter person because everyone is deferring to you, is sort of kissing up to you now that you've got all the money. That's the asymmetrical system of power in the world of big philanthropy that a system of mutual aid begins to eliminate. If the elderly couple down the street has masks, but I can help the other elderly couple down the street bring them some groceries, I don't go to them and tell them how wise and and funny and et cetera they are. We're just human beings engaged in a system of mutual dependence. And that is as worthy a form of philanthropy as the traditional version we have now in the United States, underwritten by our tax laws and et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. What do you think, Rob? Should we go to is there a role?
Yep, sure. Or I'm going to make a plea. There's a bunch of, Zoom is not so good for taking the temperature, as it were, of the room. And I have tried to put my comments so far in a manner as if to, make anybody who feels comfortable with philanthropy or even an ardent defender of philanthropy on the defensive. And so I'd love to hear from someone who, possibly even feels offended by what I've said. The ingratitude of the tenured professor at the wealthy university. Who does he think he is? Give me a break. What a joke. I want to hear that view.
I'm searching through the Zoom chat now. See, do I see any? Who wants to press here? Who's like,
Jason.
Hello, thank you. I'm not a member of the class, but I'm sitting in, and I have to leave in a couple minutes because I'm on city council where I hope to basically implement policy that puts the onus on government to take care of our most vulnerable and not on charity. Simultaneous to that, though, I'm on the board of two charities, which I think are very effective, even though I've agreed with everything you said. But it seems to me that when charity isn't used as a cudgel to make up for what government should be doing, and it isn't used as a tax break or shelter, that it can be very effective, especially in terms of effective altruism, Peter Singer, The Life You Can Save, all those sort of directions. So I'm not offended, I know what you're saying, but could you get to the good part of charity and speak to that a bit? And I would love to know if your opinion is that the incentive the incentive for charity altogether should be removed unconditionally. Like there shouldn't be a tax break for it.
Right.
Would you go that far? Do you think that's an effective approach?
Yeah, good. All right, well, this will be a good opportunity through your terrific question, Jason, to shift to the positive or constructive view that I have as well. Let's answer the tax break question first. I don't think it would be an unjust or undesirable world if we had philanthropy and charity, but there was no tax incentive for it. In fact, that is the world we had for most of, well, half of American history. The tax incentives for giving money away only came into existence in the United States in 1917, when there was the creation of an individual income tax. So, you know, if you've read your history, you know that Alexis de Tocqueville, the Frenchman who came to tour the United States in the 1820s and 30s, described America as a nation of joiners, a nation of doers, an incredible civil society that sought to solve problems, whereas in old Europe, people always looked to the government for a solution. And in fact, the Rockefellers of the world and the Carnegies of the world created their foundations without any tax breaks for doing so, because those foundations were created before 1917. So we don't need the tax breaks. And in what I've written, I've said, I think there could be a role indeed for tax incentives or tax, you know, kind of treatment of charity and philanthropy, but fundamentally different from this tax deduction mechanism I described before. What I have in mind is something like this. Imagine if the federal government gave each and every person what you could call a kind of civil society grant or a civil society stakeholding grant. Everyone got $500 from the government, reduced from your taxes in the form of a credit rather than a deduction. And then you could allocate that $500 or $1,000, pick the number that you think is appropriate, to your preferred civil society organizations. Bill Gates gets $1,000. Sandra gets $1,000, Zoe gets $1,000, I get $1,000. The government is treating each of us with equal voice. And then after that, all giving is, as it were, completely on your own dime. So of course, in that world, rich people will almost surely still have more power because they have a bigger wallet in which to give money away. But at least the policy instrument, the tax incentive, isn't amplifying the voices or preferences of the wealthy in the current form it does. Okay, now it's time, I suppose, to out myself as one of the, not the creators, but I was involved in the early small group of people that created Giving Tuesday, which I'm going to hope that many of you here have heard. Giving Tuesday is something that's now worldwide, but started about 8 or 9 years ago. That's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and the thought behind Giving Tuesday was Thanksgiving, the best of all holidays, in which we gather around with our family and express gratitude for, you know, the things that have, you know, made our life worth living, followed by a consumer orgy of Black Friday, followed by whatever it's called, you know, Small Business Saturday, and then Cyber Monday. Like yet more buying, yet more consumering. And the idea behind Giving Tuesday was, someone had better claim Tuesday after Thanksgiving before the entire week has been taken up with another like coupon sale for whatever it is we're supposed to go buy. And Giving Tuesday's idea is that anyone can give their time, their money, blood, do something that goes under the heading of radical kindness or radical generosity in the spirit of the giving season. And Giving Tuesday champions the giving of every ordinary person, not just rich people. And that's what I think has been partially lost in this age of enormous inequality, in which rich people have increasingly occupied the airspace of what it is that philanthropy is. In a world in which we all consider ourselves givers and receivers, something like that mutual aid arrangement that I was talking about before with Sasha, is a world in which generosity and kindness is a virtue that all of us indeed should strive for. And if it includes, as I said, volunteering or small donations of money or objects or things, that's a world worth striving for. And I think a world that would be better than a world in which there was no such small giving and small receiving. And so in the material that I've written, I've tried to champion that type of giving as a way of rehabilitating or reviving an older style of philanthropy that seems to occupy fewer headlines now that we live in an age, a second gilded age of billionaires and millionaires who occupy a good bunch of attention.
And Rob, maybe one more time, because there is a question around mutual aid. So just a, Sandra, I think you're asking, what is mutual aid?
Oh, I was just throwing in a resource. My internet one went a little slower than the other.
Perfect. Thank you. Worth clicking on, folks. Click on that. So keep going. Sorry.
I'll add maybe with just the last few minutes we have, we go until 4:15, is that, or 15 minutes past the hour, is that right, Tracy?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. That in what I've written, I've come to even a defense of the role of wealthy people in a way that philanthropy can support democracy. And I'll pick up something that Jason said as a way of thinking about that. The idea goes like this. Democracies have built into their very institutional design a relatively short time horizon for decision making, and that comes through elections. People stand for election in democracies every few years, and so when our elected representatives make decisions about social policies, their incentive is to make decisions in which the benefits of any policy change or any spending program can be seen in short time horizons rather than long time horizons. If you have problems, social problems, however, where we need to have a kind of experimental and long time horizon approach. So let's take, say, climate change. If a politician were to say, we're going to try out a brand new approach to, mitigating the climate crisis, we're going to have to spend a whole lot of money. We don't know if it's going to work at all, and we won't even get any evidence until 10 years from now. When that person stands for election in 2, 4, or 6 years, and someone says, all right, well, you approved the expenditure of billions of dollars. We don't know if it isn't going to work, and we won't find out for another 10 years. That person's election, chances go down, because we're trying to evaluate our elected officials on short time horizons. What philanthropy can do is take slightly longer time horizon bets or experiments that government doesn't have the incentive to do, and the marketplace doesn't have incentive to do either. And if I had to give you a current example of that I think would be good, many of you have heard probably the idea of basic income or guaranteed income. Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate, sort of famously supported a version of this idea. But a lot of whether or not basic income or guaranteed income would be good or bad, or how powerful a social policy it would be, depends on a lot of small details. How much money per month? Is it delivered in one bucket of money per year? Does the 5-year-old in the family also get the basic income, or do the parents get the basic income? There's lots of small details on designing the policy that will matter a great deal. And once again, here's a good example where it's not in the incentive for any elected official to say, we're going to hand out a guaranteed income to people without knowing what the policy effects would be, depending on how it's designed. But philanthropists can come in, give these a trial run in places, and then when they get the policy designs right, there's an evidentiary basis for doing it better rather than worse. They can present that policy solution to legislatures for adoption into the ordinary mechanism of government. And the best example of philanthropy in the United States in this model, in fact, the example that almost everybody knows, is the Carnegie creation of libraries, public libraries. This is an example of American philanthropy at its best, in my view. Rich person has an idea. Wouldn't it be cool if we created free circulation of ideas and information in the form of books to ordinary citizens so that they don't have to pay for them on their own? Carnegie didn't say, I'm so rich, I'm going to build a library in every town across the country. I'll pay for all the books in every library, and I'll pay for all the librarians in perpetuity. Even he didn't have that much money. What he said was, I'll try it out in a bunch of places, and if it goes well and people like it, it will be adopted into the ordinary program of local government. And that's what public libraries are now today. Philanthropic pilot experiments that, when successful, can be adopted on broader scale by the ordinary operation of the government or the state. And if you believe that philanthropy can do that, then I think that supports democracy. I see someone's putting into the chat something about reparations and restorative justice. I think that's an important view as well. You might have read Tracy with this group, Anand Giridharadas' book, Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World, and the idea that it's coming.
No, I recommend it. We haven't read it though.
Got it. Some people think that if there's a stink in the money making, or there are harms produced in the making of the money in the first place, then what the rich person owes is reparation for what harms they've done, rather than philanthropic, do-gooding. And I'll give you the philosophical equivalent of this. Fisher, I see you there on the screen. I don't know if you're wearing a watch, but imagine you have a really nice watch on your hand. I come over and I steal your watch. All right, I take your laptop, say, whatever it is you've got there. I go down to the pawn shop and I get $500 for your laptop. And then I decide I'm going to give the $500 away that I got from your laptop to the most effective charitable organization. And then Fisher comes to me and says, hey, you stole my laptop. And I say back to Fisher, it's true, but look at the extraordinary good that has been done with the money that came from your laptop. The world is so much better, Fisher, because I have given the money away for this extraordinarily good purpose. Now, you might say, I think an ordinary person would say, that's very nice of you, but it doesn't excuse the theft. It doesn't undo the harm you did in the first place. And that's the idea behind tainted money. If the Sackler family, through Purdue Pharma, has made mountains of money off the opioid crisis, and then gives the money away to universities and museums to fund the Sackler wing of the Modern Art Museum, it doesn't undo the harm they did in making the money in the first place. And so what the Sackler family owes us now is reparations for the opioid crisis, not philanthropic donations to cultural organizations. So we have a backward-looking attitude about philanthropy. That's also important.
Rob, with the last 2 minutes, can I take you back to when you were in undergraduate school? You're a junior, you're a senior. Maybe you were trying to figure out your purpose.
Yep.
Your meaning. What wisdom do you want to share now that you think, boy, I wish I had that when I was a junior and senior, as I'm thinking about my place in the world and the kind of change I want to see? What can you share with our class here who are working hard to be part of positive change?
Okay, well, that's a big and a wonderful question. And of course, I don't know any of your personal circumstances, but I'll share actually some of the things that were in my head back when I was a junior or a senior. There was this phrase that a lot of people used in when I was graduating college that was something like the following: you should try to make decisions after you graduate that keep your options open. And the idea was like, don't close any doors that you might decide you'd want to walk through at the age of 25 or age of 30. And I now think in retrospect, the idea of keeping your options open is a way of actually preventing yourself from engaging in anything in depth. And that part of what it means to transition from being a student into being an adult who makes his or her way into the world is to start closing some doors, even if you could have been totally happy having walked through them. Not to say choose one thing and only do one thing, but if the idea is to maximize the things that you could do, That's a way of producing inaction and being shallow and hopscotching around with a fear of missing out constantly on offer. And instead trying to begin to try out various things in depth, where maybe you'll find something that does meet your passion and is at that intersection between the world's great need and your great gladness. That's the sweet spot. Things that are socially oriented, but that also fill your own, aspirations to flourish as an individual. And if you're lucky enough to find that intersection, then that's where to settle and to go deep. So don't be afraid of closing doors. Don't try to maximize the opportunities you have. Begin to make some choices in which you begin to actually get deeper on things. And that'll allow you to experience the depth of it rather than just the shallow taste of it.
Wow, thank you, Rob, so much for spending this time with us. I hope, I certainly feel you've helped us go deeper into this topic of philanthropy, what at its best, at its worst. And we appreciate your time and you sharing this with us. Miami University appreciates the partnership with Stanford here.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, Tracy. And thank you to everyone who took the time to show up. I'm really grateful to be in conversation with you.
Wonderful. Well, folks, come on.